whenever I speak with anyone from the Indian Army, they tell me that India has won all the wars, but it has lost all the wars on the table.
Leaders generally seem to think that Indian foreign policy evolved out of our freedom movement. India is too big to depend on other countries for its security.
At one hand, you have to deal with US as well. On the other hand, you have to deal with China as well.
Well, that is the task of diplomacy. How do you maneuver? How do you protect your national interests? Diplomacy is a very, very essential art. It has been reactive at times. Other times it has been also very proactive in our neighborhood, what we did with Bangladesh, 1971, 1987, Sri Lanka operations.
At one hand, friends with Russia. China is our immediate neighbor. We are partnering with US in a lot of things. But these countries do not have a good relationship with each other. So how do you balance this dimension out? Should India consider America a true partner?
The Americans will never want India to become so strong as to pose a threat to American domination of the world in all respects. You have to have a goal and then work out a strategy for achieving that. Mr. Jayesh pointed out in relation to President Trump coming back to power and his policies, this is not in the syllabus.
In the next 5 years, what do you think is that one bold move from the foreign policy perspective that India needs to make?
I think the biggest thing we need to do is...
Namaste Jai Hind, my name is Jayesh Gangan and this is The J Report, a podcast where we talk about everything that is happening in the world through a Bharatiya lens. And tonight, our focus is on Bharat itself. In this podcast, my guest is Mr. Rajiv Sikri ji, a career diplomat with over 36 years of experience in Indian foreign services. He retired in 2006 as the secretary in Ministry of External Affairs. The focus of this podcast is Mr. Rajiv Sikri's new book, Strategic Conundrums, Reshaping India's Foreign Policy. Because of the experience that Mr. Rajiv Sikri has in this field, his word is taken very seriously in the community of Indian diplomacy. If you are someone who wants to learn more about Indian foreign policy, then you have to take seriously what Mr. Rajiv Sikri ji has to say and talk about India's foreign policy. The world is changing rapidly and India needs to change with it. There is no other option for us. The way India functions and the way India handles its foreign policy, it needs certain tweaks, certain changes, and that is exactly the topic of our discussion in this podcast. If you're someone who is interested in India's foreign policy, if you're someone who is interested in geopolitics, international relations, this podcast is a must watch for you. So without any further ado, let's start this podcast in 3, 2, 1. Rajiv sir, welcome on this show. I have been looking forward to this particular podcast since a long time because, as we discussed, you have spent 55 years in this field.
Yes.
And you understand India's foreign policy better than anyone else, I think. So we'll be talking about a lot of things today. But sir, firstly, welcome on the show.
Thank you for inviting me. I look forward to our conversation.
Yes, sir. There has been a lot of talks about Indian foreign policy and how it has been managed over the years. And since you have seen over 55 years in this field, firstly, let's start from there. Like, what are the basics of Indian foreign policy that have stayed relevant and continued over the years?
I think Indian foreign policy evolved out of our freedom movement, and because of our long experience under colonial rule, Mr. Nehru was very firm about maintaining an independent line in foreign policy, which later got translated into the non-aligned movement, and now we call it strategic autonomy or whatever it is. Because I think that there's a correct perception that India is too big, too proud of its history, to depend on other countries for its security. Now, it is not possible for India, even then or now, to be insulated from the rest of the world. So we have to craft a policy that looks at our own resources, our own capabilities, in relation to those of other countries and see how we can maintain an independent foreign policy. By that I mean independent decision making. Now, that decision that suits our country's national interest. Now, at times that decision may be in favor of coming closer to a particular country or a group of countries, but the idea is that the decision should be based on your interests and should be your decisions, not imposed by any outside power. Like, you have the various alliances, you had them during the Cold War, even now you have NATO,
Right.
where, the Americans snap their fingers and everyone jumps. No, that's not possible. And that often creates some tensions in our relations with major players like the Americans, who expect that, whatever we say should be done. So that is not possible. I think there is a national consensus in India on this point. So I think that is the overriding common thread in our foreign policy.
But sir, in your new book, which is Strategic Conundrums, in this book, you have emphasized the need for a more strategic and long-term foreign policy plans for India.
Yes.
And isn't it true that India's diplomacy has often been reactive rather than being proactive?
Yes, you're right. It has been reactive at times. Other times it has been also very proactive. For example, in our neighborhood, what we did with Bangladesh, 1971, 1987, Sri Lanka operations. We've been quite activist in Nepal from time to time. So yes, we have not always been reactive, though maybe that reaction was, in these instances that I've mentioned, was in response to perceived threats to our security. But I think that in the early decades after our independence, we had a somewhat romanticized, idealistic view, and we laid too much emphasis on multilateral diplomacy, too much reliance on that, rather than hard-nosed national interests. So we took the Kashmir issue to the United Nations, and we actually began to believe that the non-aligned movement was going to make a difference to the world. We were very active on things like nuclear disarmament, all the good things around the world, But now I think we have, under Prime Minister Modi, become far more hard-headed about our national interests. And
Have we become aggressive?
no, I don't think particularly aggressive. Now, if you take our neighborhood, what I understand is that we are now engaging with them more constructively, trying to link their economies with ours, so that regardless of what happens in those countries, the relationship should continue,
Right.
Unabated. Secondly, I think we have given up the idea of being, the big bully in the neighborhood and throwing our weight around. Now we are more respectful of the sovereignty of our neighboring countries, and we're trying to see if they can also see that their national interest is served by a closer and mutually profitable relationship
Right.
with India. So there have been nuances. I think earlier with our neighbors, we did not pay sufficient attention. Prime Minister did not visit in neighbors for many, many years. Now, I think there's a more active foreign policy with our neighbors, not just our immediate neighbors, but if you take the East Asian, Southeast Asian countries, West Asian, Gulf countries. We're far more active because we see that this is our larger extended neighborhood. And then when you look at the whole world, again, over the last 10 years in particular, we have been very active in building ties with countries that were ignored for many, many decades. So all this is are the changing contours of India's foreign policy.
Right. But so you talked about the non-alignment movement, and in the modern times, it's called strategic autonomy. Now, people might debate about what is what, but then do you think this is a right option in the modern times when there's a great competition going on between certain nations? Or is India just trying to avoid difficult choices between, let's say, the US and the China?
No, you see, non-aligned came up in the context of two power blocks during the Cold War, and there was pressure on India to join one of them or the other. Now, even today, there's no pressure from China to join any bloc which they have. Though I would say that China wants to be number one in Asia, and it cannot be number one in Asia unless it has India as part of its global framework, where China sits on top and that we are below. So we are not accepting that. The other group is the Americans, and you have seen how much pressure they exercised on us on Ukraine and Russia. And sometimes we have ceded ground, sometimes we have stood our ground. So I don't think that this has become irrelevant. You know, earlier because it was in the context of bloc politics, it was called non-alignment. Today, we are talking about strategic autonomy or independent foreign policy. As I mentioned earlier, it means that you will take decisions based on your national interests, not because some other power tells you to follow a certain line.
Right. But then doesn't that make it very difficult for a diplomat, let's say, that at one hand you have to deal with US as well, on the other hand you have to deal with China as well, and you have to maintain that balance?
Well, that is the task of diplomacy, and that how do you maneuver, how do you protect your national interests, and diplomacy is a very, very essential art and necessary to preserve our national interests. Because when diplomacy fails, then you come into confrontation and war. So you're always trying to find how you can reconcile your national interests with the interests of other countries. And sometimes compromises are needed. Sometimes you have to be firm. So that is the whole business of diplomacy.
So in the book you argue that India needs to think beyond regionalism, and it needs to take a global role now. It needs to focus on the larger global geopolitical role.
Yeah.
But do you think we have the diplomatic and military capabilities to back that up?
We have to play a global role because we are an increasingly important global player. Today, as we all know, we are the fifth largest economy in the world. And in a few years, we are projected to become the third largest. Now, when a country is in that position, it has to be a player. And other countries also cannot ignore you. So they will try to engage with you, maybe try to manipulate you, put pressure on you, seek to get benefits from you. So all that is very much part of the thing. From our side also, we, I think, realize that as our economy grows in an interdependent world where we are dependent for many things on the rest of the world, whether it is energy, whether it is jobs for our people, whether it is travel, whether it is education, whether it is energy, other essential raw materials and manufactured goods. We need to engage with the world, and therefore uh, our diplomacy has to factor these things, very, very carefully. I mean, today, more than when I joined the Foreign Service, I think ordinary people in India are much more aware of India's linkages and the importance of India's contact with the rest of the world. Very few people traveled abroad in those days. There was no foreign exchange. But today you see millions of Indians traveling, whether it is for work, for business, for tourism, for education, whatever it is. So anything that happens in the world has an impact on the lives of ordinary Indians. And therefore, our foreign policy has to take into account the interests of our people. Now, you'll have noticed that in the last few years, we have been giving a lot of attention to the Indian diaspora, the Indians abroad,
Right.
because we see that they are an important asset. In any case, they are a responsibility. You have 90 lakh Indians working in the Gulf. That's a huge number. And so what happens there is of great importance to us. And anything which affects them will affect the internal politics of many states in India. So, that becomes a very important factor in our foreign policy. You may recall that in the time of the first Gulf War in the early 90s, we did an evacuation from Kuwait. Now, today, there is no way you can evacuate 9 million people. They are there. And you have seen that how when there is trouble in different parts of the world, our people are, our ships are there, our aircraft are there, our diplomats are there. Everyone is there to help out, to evacuate them from dangerous situations. So all these factors go to make our foreign policy and the priorities. One other thing now, there's an increasing role of our states in foreign policy, and the Ministry of External Affairs has, got offices in different states, and now many problems with our neighbors cannot be resolved without the cooperation of the states. You can't resolve problems with Bangladesh without involving West Bengal or Assam or Tripura. They're very vital.
Right.
Or the Tamil Nadu factor in our Sri Lanka policy, or the Kerala factor in our Gulf policy, or, Punjab and Pakistan, and so forth. So all this means that the progress in our states depends on the state of our relations with our neighbors.
Right.
And because our borders are quite porous, they are artificial borders after 1947, you can't have sealed borders. We have to some extent with Pakistan, but you see that on the Jammu and Kashmir front, there's a lot of infiltration. You have the same problem with Bangladesh.
Sure.
With Nepal and Bhutan, you have open borders anyway.
Myanmar is the same.
Myanmar is the same. We have this problem now. So all this, affects our internal politics also.
Right.
And therefore, foreign policy cannot be seen in isolation. It has to be part of an overall national strategy. Now, you are probably aware that we have the most important cabinet committee is the Cabinet Committee on Security. And who are its members? Apart from the Prime Minister, there's the External Affairs Minister, the Defense Minister, the Home Minister, the Finance Minister, and the National Security Advisor. Why? Because any decision that you take involving security has ramifications for all these ministries. Now, one minister may say, I want to do this. Finance Minister says, I don't have the money. Or you say, let's do this. But the Defense Minister says, look, I mean, can we really do it? So, this has to be an integrated approach.
But when you look at it from an integrated approach lens, do you think at times it is also problematic because there are so many departments now involved, and that might hamper the overall decision that you have to take?
Well, every government is a complex machinery, and you're right, it involves so many stakeholders. So, this process of reconciling different interests is an ongoing, always has been, and that is why you have, at apart from the Cabinet Committee on Security, you have at senior officials, also the Cabinet Secretary, the Prime Minister's office. They meet with the senior secretaries and try and harmonize positions. So all that has to be done, and you have to involve the states also. Now, for example, take Bangladesh. When we had the Ganga Waters Treaty, that was possible only because Jyoti Basu, played a very active and positive role in that. By contrast, we have not been able to sign the Tista agreement with Bangladesh because the present Chief Minister of West Bengal is opposed to it. So you can't move forward on that, So all these different interests have to be harmonized. So policy-making government is a complex business.
But you talked about the diaspora. Do you think there's a difference between how India looks at its diaspora versus how China has looked at its diaspora?
Yes, I think there is a difference.
Is it a good difference?
When we became independent, Mr. Nehru's position was that our people who are abroad, they should essentially, be citizens of the country where they are living in, and that's it. I mean, yeah, there's some emotional ties and so forth to India, but nothing else. I think today the approach is somewhat different. We recognize that the diaspora can play a very important role in bringing our countries together. We also see, and you have seen it, for example, in the various instances and incidents involving extremists and Khalistani separatists and so forth, how the diaspora can create problems for India also. So how we handle our diaspora is something which directly affects our national interests. We are, I think for the last 20 odd years, we have been having this Pravasi Bharatiya Divas.
Right.
And we recognize, that there are various types of diaspora. One, of course, is those who were taken abroad as indentured labor or as workers to plantations in Southeast Asia or Caribbean or Fiji and so forth. The other is the workers in the Gulf, people like that. The third is the educated people who are in the developed countries, USA, Canada, UK, etc. So there are different dimensions, and each one has a role to play. Now, they also bring in a lot of foreign exchange to India. So a lot of our reserves are because of the remittances. They contribute to tourism, airline traffic. They come and spend money in India. They become, in a sense, our ambassadors abroad because many of them, as you have seen in recent months, in, say, the United States, are occupying very high positions. Now, they are, of course, citizens of the country where they are living, but they do have a link with India. And, the thing is, can we leverage that in some way for our benefit?
Right.
Somebody may say, I'd like to do something in India. Why? Because, my roots are there, my family is there, whatever. So I think that is a new dimension of our diaspora diplomacy that we see, which is why you see that our Prime Minister, whenever he goes abroad, makes it a point to connect with the diaspora. We've also, in the last 15, 20 years, started this business of OCI, the Overseas Citizen of India, so that our countrymen who have migrated abroad and become citizens of another country, they have the right to live and work in India and get all the rights of a citizen, except in certain respects, like the right to vote, participate in politics, or buy agricultural land or plantations and so forth. So these are incentives that we offer to our people to connect with India. Now, the Chinese thing you mentioned, again, the Chinese would like to use their diaspora as one which is essentially, firstly, loyal to China. And many of them have got a lot of business interests there. But it doesn't always work that way. For example, in Singapore, the Chinese there, who are a majority, have a very specific sense of being Singaporean. The other difference is that the Chinese diaspora, which is mostly in East and Southeast Asia, is a prosperous business community diaspora. So they control the politics in the economies and thereby also have an influence in the politics of these countries. Our diaspora has not been of that kind historically. Now we have, as we've just discussed, a class of people who are at high positions, whether in government or business or technology or whatever. But, it's different for the Chinese.
Yeah. But if we look at Israel from that same lens and how they have lobbied their own interests on a global level, especially in the American politics, do you think the Indian diaspora can do that for India?
The Israeli influence on American politics is well known. They are very well entrenched in American society. They control a lot of levers of influence and power, whether it is finance, whether it is media, a lot of bankers and businessmen and so forth. And this has become a subject of some concern in America also, that the diaspora there is openly lobbying and interfering in American politics. But then politics being politics, I suppose money plays a role in decision making. The Israeli and the Jewish lobby in the United States is a very unique case of influence of a diaspora. But one has to concede that, the Jews are very talented people and they know how to leverage their...
So, but then why can't the Indians do that? Because if you look at current American politics, there are a lot of positions that Indians acquire.
The Indians in America are, say, in the technology sectors. They are in, some are in politics also. But you don't find too many businessmen, industrialists of Indian origin on that scale, So that's where the money is. And I think the basic premise we had that the people who are living abroad should be obviously loyal to the country where they are is okay. But they can be a bridge between India and those countries. I think we did leverage our diaspora to get support for the Indo-US nuclear deal. That was one instance where we got some help from there. For the rest, I suppose it's up to the diaspora how they feel, whether if there's any conflict of interest between their being American and being Indian by origin.
And because you talked about how India is growing right now, and the world is moving from a unipolar system to a multipolar system, wherein two poles for sure are US and China, and there's a role that has been played by, let's say, Russia, Israel, France, so many countries. Do you think India is one of those poles, or is India just adjusting to whatever is happening on a global level?
I think it is our goal, our ambition, to be one of the poles, to be on the high table.
But we are into pole right now.
Look, at the moment, the only truly global player is the United States. China is a pretender. It wants to be at that table. And certainly it has many of the attributes of being a great power. But it is still not there. So in that sense, the only truly global player is the United States. The rest are having various degrees of influence. And India is one of them. We would certainly like to play a greater role in the world. And I think that is where we have as our goal to be a leading power, which is setting some of the rules of the thing. Now, that is where we are collaborating with other countries, the United States, with France, with Japan, with Russia, that, how do we get it? One feature which is important to bear in mind is that all the established players in the world, the P5, the Security Council, they are weakened, relatively speaking. The United States may be number one, but it is definitely somewhat weakened. The Soviet Union is broken up. Russia, again, it is weakened compared to what it was a few decades ago. China is, it's no longer growing as fast as it would and as it was, and it has many internal problems. So whether this model of economic growth is sustainable in the long run, I don't know, because the information which comes out of China is very controlled. And I think they have a problem in, their one-child policy has created a population imbalance, which they are now trying to reverse. You have a lot of social things where people are not getting married, not having children. So all this has a long-term effect on society. But certainly China is doing very well in many areas of technology, and they have a very focused long-term goal. France and Britain, the other two members of the Security Council, are very diminished powers today. Germany is certainly an important player, but you see how they really have no independent voice in the world. When, for example, the Nord Stream 2 pipeline was blown up, they just stood there and did nothing, Japan, again, there were signs under Shinzo Abe that it wanted to play a more independent role. But today, it's a little more back in the American fold. So it's a world in churn. And as the other powers get weaker and India becomes stronger, hopefully will continue to do so. This is an opportunity for India. How we leverage it, how do we take advantage of it, that is the task before us. We are not a status quo power. We want a change in the world. We recognize that the world has changed, and so our foreign policy also has to keep in tune with the changing times. This is the challenge before us now. How we do it is another.
Right. But in this changing world wherein so many powers are either declining or rising, how do you take a stand? Because we have always maintained a strategic autonomy and we take pride in that. But at the same time, we are at one hand friends with Russia. China is our immediate neighbor. We are partnering with US in a lot of things. But these countries do not have a very, let's say, a good relationship with each other. So how do you balance this dimension out?
Well, there are a few things that we need to do. One, as you rightly said, is strategic autonomy. That is our goal. That is our thing. That we are very clear that we cannot depend on others for our security. And the second is that we have to see what are our strengths. We have to leverage our geographical position. After all, we are in the heart of Asia. We are at what we call the intersection of 5 arcs. Arc of stability to the east in Southeast Asia, arc of uncertainty to the north, Nepal, Tibet, China, and so forth. Instability to our west, right from Myanmar through Pakistan, Afghanistan, up to the Mediterranean. The arc of communications, the Indian Ocean, which opens up there. And we've got arc of energy, which is very close to us. Major sources of energy are close to us. So we have to leverage that. But there are also geographical problems that we have, our limitations with our neighbors. Our neighbors are much smaller than we are. They are a little insecure about their identity. They're always trying to leverage other countries and so forth to balance against India. And, how do we overcome these limitations? The third, very important, is that we have to develop ourselves in all respects, economically, technologically, militarily. This whole concept of Viksit Bharat 2047, it's a goal. Now, some people laugh it off, but I don't think we should do that because unless you have a goal, you're never going to achieve it. We've all been to college and school and jobs. You all want to be the best. Are you going to be the top of your class if you say, no, I will sit at the back of the class? No. You have to aspire to be at the top, and then maybe you'll get there, maybe you won't. You'll have to work hard in it, you have to work hard. But at least you must have a goal. So that Viksit Bharat is the goal that we have. If you say, no, we are like that only, we are going to stay like that, well, obviously you will remain there because you have no ambition. I'm not saying that you cannot achieve it, but you have to first have a vision and then a strategy for achieving it. And
Right.
these are the things. The next point is that we need good leadership. We need good leaders who are thinking strategically. I think we do have in Prime Minister Modi a person who is thinking strategically. He's, one of the few people I know at the top who thinks technology, I mean, he was in Paris
Yeah.
for this
And
AI
he
summit,
mentioned
and
that
you
AI
know,
thing. Yeah.
he's involved. He thinks about that. That's very, very important. Now, what will happen in the future? What kind of leaders we will have between now and 2047? I can't say. I hope that we will continue to have good leaders who think strategically, who care for India, and then I think we need a national consensus that this is the way to move forward. Sadly, there are too many voices within India, in the political realm and outside, who are constantly trying to bring down India, put down India, oh, nothing has happened, etc. With this kind of an attitude, you don't present a united thing. You're busy squabbling among yourselves. So, and I think many of them are susceptible to a lot of pressures and blandishments from overseas, vested interests overseas, who wouldn't like India to advance so much. So we need a united society, nationalistic people who, think about India. We need young people like you who see the future. I mean, you have all grown up in an era where it has been a rising trajectory of India. Whereas in the 20th century, there was the aftermath of partition, our food problems, our foreign exchange problems. So many problems were there. We fought wars. Today, whatever you take so many things for granted. But when I started working, one of the reasons people wanted to join the Foreign Service was an opportunity to travel abroad.
Yeah.
Otherwise, all you were given was $8 to go. What did you do? So you had to find some friends and this and that who would stay with them. We've come a long way from there, And I think that our present younger generation should, build on the achievements that we have had over the last 75 years or more, now 78 years, and, see how to take it forward so that you have a goal. I do think that our young people today are certainly more ambitious. They're not content to see ki chalta hai. You also want to say, okay, we want to see India as a strong, proud, confident country. Now, that's very good, but you have to work for that. And every citizen of India has to work in that direction if we are to achieve this goal and work in a united manner. That is very important.
So this is something wherein, so I can give you my perspective is that every young Indian wants to take the country forward, but then there are certain problems with the way we function as a country, and the problems are in our political institutions. So, for example, recently a controversy happened about a comedian and a statement that he passed on a very particular show. It became a parliamentary issue. What is the need for that?
This is what I mean. You need responsible politicians. I think it's very sad that so much of our parliament's time is spent on tu meh,
Exactly.
and not on issues that matter. This is one of our weaknesses. I think there's a lot of frustration because when political parties don't have power, then they feel irrelevant and they try and bring down the government in power. Well, I certainly hope this will change, and it depends on young people. Who do you vote for?
Yeah.
I mean, do you vote for a party which has a positive agenda, or do you vote for a party which is got a negative agenda? Is it a party or a political organization which is looking ahead, or is it something which is looking in the rear view mirror? That's the choice which every Indian has to make.
But coming back to the global power shift that is happening now, BRICS was something which was supposed to challenge the Western powers, but it is China that dominates it. So, do you think India should invest more of its time in BRICS? Is it the right strategy?
Look, BRICS started off as an economic, it's still an economic body which started off about 20 odd years ago. And I think would not overestimate the importance of BRICS, but neither would I underestimate its potential. Why do I say that? Because at one level, the BRICS are too invested. They have too many stakes in relations with the Western countries to go against them. And, there are so many differences among the BRICS, India versus China and so forth. But on the other hand, you have so many countries wanting to join BRICS. Now, that's an interesting phenomenon. And I think it reflects the desire of a large number of countries around the world to have some alternative to a West-dominated global scene. Now, India is, as Foreign Minister Jayesh Gangan put it, India is not anti-West. Our perspective is that of a non-West country. So we are not anti-West, we are non-West. We have huge stakes in the West. We have so many linkages, whether economic, technological, people to people, etc. And I think that there is a clear realization that our growth, prosperity, it depends on a good relationship with the West, particularly the United States. That's why we say that the relationship with the USA is most important one. It is so. Now, Prime Minister Modi will be there in a day or so to see how to work it out with President Trump. At the same time, we don't want to ignore other players in the world. Russia has been a very reliable friend for decades, and we do get a lot of technology and so forth. We're getting a lot of oil from them also at discounted rates. So we should not forget our old friends, and Russia does remain a consequential country globally. It's not some country that you can ignore after.
But what about Russia and China's partnership?
I think the Americans have pushed them closer together. And this is a contradiction, because if the Americans think that China is their biggest rival and long-term threat, then it doesn't make sense for them to push the Russians and the Chinese closer together. But my own understanding of Russia is that they will never like to be dominated by China. And therefore, the Russians also have an interest in ensuring that they have a good relationship with India as a kind of a balance. They don't want to be too dependent on China. So this is where the games come in. You see that we are with China, but on the other hand, India is an important player, and increasingly so.
But in the recent times, America has been considered to be the natural ally or natural partner for India. But if we look at how America views its relationships with other countries historically, it has been transactional. So, should India consider America a true partner?
A natural ally was a term used by Vajpayee ji, I think. Uh, I think there will be limits to Indo-US partnership
In what sense?
in the sense that the Americans will never want India to become so strong as to pose a threat to American domination of the world in all respects. If I think the Americans do not want to make the mistake that they made vis-a-vis China, whose rise they facilitated, and now they're finding that they're. So the American state, deep state, whatever you may call it, has always tried to keep some leverages against India to make sure that we don't step out of line. Whether and how this might change under Mr. Trump, let us see. I mean, we saw in the last year or so the problems we had with this Pannu and Trudeau and Niger and all that, you know. And now all that is coming out. The Bangladesh coup, all that is coming out. The US aid interference in our internal politics, an attempt to influence the elections. This is all coming out now. This is being talked about and respected earlier, but now it is more and more evident. We can be partners with the USA because I think the United States also needs India. They need our workforce, our brain power, because now the new game is artificial intelligence, and there, of course, both the United States and China are in the lead. But in a long-term perspective, India has some games to play, and how we do it is something that we need to work out.
Right.
So it's a very new area, but it's one of those technologies which perhaps can enable us to leapfrog and move ahead, you know. And this is where perhaps our demographic dividend can play a role. These are very early days. There are so many dangers of AI. You know, there are very few guardrails. You know, even yesterday, the United States and UK did not sign on to this AI declaration in Paris. So these are early days, but it's a very important area. Then there are other technologies which are. So when it comes to technologies, I think that United States and India have an interest in working together. Now, take for example, you know, we talked earlier about the diaspora. We have got about 4 to 5 million Indian origin people in the United States, whether they are citizens of USA or some are there as workers or students or whatever it is. If the United States makes it difficult for our techies to go there, or if our techies feel that the environment is not conducive, now this new thing that children born to people from other countries who are not green card holders or citizens will not get American citizenship. Now, that may change the views of many people because a person might say, well, you know, okay, I'm working here, I'm making good money. I may not get a green card, but at least my child, if he's born here, would become an American citizen and so forth. Now, if that person, that family thinks that that is not going to happen, then you start looking at alternatives. And one of the alternatives, and this is something where I think India should be working very, very hard, is to create the environment, create the ecosystem in India that would encourage these people to come back to India and bring with them the talent, the experience that they have acquired while working in a global environment.
Right.
That is the thing. And secondly, that we have to develop our education system in India so that our best and brightest young people do not feel the need to go overseas, but to work in India. Now, you're aware that a lot of the top people graduating from IITs have America as their
Yeah.
primary.
We have a brain drain
We
issue.
have. But that brain drain could become an asset also. On the other hand, have you noticed that in the space and missile technology sectors, a lot of the people working are not from IITs.
Yeah.
They are from the RECs.
Hmm.
So it's not that we don't have the bright people. We have the bright people. And they've done wonders. So, this is where, water flows in whatever direction the slope is there. Our task, our challenge is to create that environment in India where people say, oh, why should I go abroad? I can I have a good environment here. But do we have a good environment? How are about our cities, our education, our health, our pollution? All that is there. On the other hand, you have family and so forth. Now, you see what is happening, say, at the lower level, where it is very difficult to get people to come to the cities to work. Because, why? Because the person who's on the farm says, I'm getting my ration here, I'm getting this, I'm getting that. Why should I leave my land? Why should I go and live in a city? So the natural tendency, if you can make a good living at home, why would you go abroad? So it is for us as a country, for our various governments, central and state, to create the environment where, people feel that, they should stay in India. And if that happens, then certainly we can develop very fast.
But sir, if we circle back to the US, now US needs India more than anything right now because the only challenge to US right now is China. And to counter China, they might need India's help. So why are they creating problems in our neighborhood? Let's say, for example, Bangladesh. What happened over there and Sheikh Hasina's somewhat clear indication that it was done by the US with her one statement. Why is US trying to do all of these things when it needs India so badly right now?
Well, as I said, the idea is to keep India from getting too comfortable in its neighborhood, keep some pressure on India. Whether this will be Mr. Trump's policy, I don't know. It might change. Hopefully it will. And certainly I would like to hope that this is an important agenda item for us in Prime Minister's discussions with Mr. Trump that, look, you can't do this to our neighborhood. It's a question of our security. So I think the Democrats had a certain worldview. Mr. Trump definitely has a very different worldview. He's a transactional leader. So let's see how we can transact with him.
So, in the book, you have highlighted India's growing challenge in countering China's expanding influence. Now, is it even possible to compete with China because their economy, their military is superior to us? So, how do we compete with them?
I think it's a question of A, self-belief, and B, working out the right policies. When China became independent, it was not more developed than India, but they had a vision of themselves, which I think India lacked. Take, for example, their focus on China's territorial integrity, Taiwan, other things, Tibet. They say it's part of it. But in India, we, under Mr. Nehru and also his successors as prime minister, had a very restricted view of our strategic parameters. Now, the strategic parameter of India extends from the Hindu Kush to the Irrawaddy. But if you imagine that your interests are only the boundaries of post-partition India, then you make a mistake. And we did make mistakes. We took the matter of Kashmir to the UN. This should have been an internal matter. It should have been sorted out at that time. We got the opportunity to integrate Nepal when Tribhuvan took refuge in India. We missed that. Wherever there's also Baluchistan, which wanted to be independent. We did not support that.
Even the UNSC seat, the Security Council.
We were offered the UNSC seat. They said, "Nahi, China ka theek hai." Phir hum, so that kind of strategic perspective, in my view, was lacking. Even subsequently, we were saying, okay, we will divide Kashmir along under Mr. Nehru, along the Chenab River, that line. Subsequently said, Siachen, we can have an agreement there. Now, if Jammu and Kashmir is part of India, why would you have an agreement on Siachen? That's part of India. And today, no army officer will say we should give up Siachen. We walked out of Tibet. We walked out of East Turkestan. We didn't preserve our interests in our strategic neighborhood. So that is the difference. We've made mistakes.
Do you think these mistakes can be corrected anytime soon?
I hope that, it's always an uphill task. But what has been done is done. You can't really do very much about that. And therefore, we are trying to involve our neighborhood in a cooperative framework.
We were talking about the China issue for India. Now, when BRI, which is Belt and Road Initiative, it came out, China, when it started working on BRI, India outrightly rejected BRI, which was a good move. But do you think in the hindsight now, maybe it wasn't that good of a move?
No, I think it was the right decision. It was a bold decision because for two reasons. One, the flagship project of the BRI, the CPEC, China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, passes through territory which we say is ours. So it is a violation of our sovereignty. If you don't object to that, then it means you accept that it is a legitimate project in territory which we don't claim, basically. So that is one reason. The second is that we recognize this as a Chinese global initiative to gain influence around the world by getting countries into a debt trap, by linking their economies to that of China, and becoming a kind of a new colonial power. I think the experience of many countries over the last decade or more is that what we had said at the beginning has come out to be true. Many countries are in that debt trap, and many countries are trying to get out of that. So that, I think, was the right decision. It required considerable courage to stand up to the Chinese there. I think it also signaled that we were not prepared to be part of a China-centric Asian or global order. because this is what it meant. And, if the Chinese BRI is successful as envisaged by China, then you will have China setting new standards, global standards, and controlling technology. That is not in India's interest. It is an issue that I think the whole world is facing today in respect of the United States, which is a technology leader and which controls a lot of the global technologies. But with the United States, because it is a more open system, the ability to influence decisions there is much more than it would be if the Chinese were to dominate. So if we are talking of global standards for anything in technology or whatever, as an Indian, I would rather be with the United States than with China. Of course, it is best if we are the leader, but that is, part of
Right.
how we see ourselves developing and what we can do to achieve it. But that's where I think our relationship with the United States is important.
There are a lot of people who argue that China has isolated India within our neighborhood. Do you think that is true in any manner?
Well, the Chinese factor in our neighborhood is something which cannot be ignored because China has deep pockets and they are very adept at buying off influential political and economic personalities in the countries where they operate. Our neighbors are always looking for leverages to balance India's overwhelming influence because of our size and so on and so forth. And earlier, say, Pakistan was using the United States, then China, Saudi Arabia to balance, India to have leverage. You had the United States, earlier Britain, then the United States interfering in South Asian politics in a big way in Nepal and Sri Lanka. But that's a reality we have to live with. Every country wants to have some leverage against a larger neighbor. You see it in Europe, you see it in Russia's neighbors. So the thing is that we have to be generous with our neighbors. And we cannot treat our immediate neighbors like any other country. We have to be willing to give a lot more attention to them, to respect their sovereignty, independence fully. I'm sorry to cut you off, but I have to ask you this. Do you think India has that big brother syndrome or the big bully syndrome in our neighborhood? I think there is certainly a perception about that. And it's not something which is confined to the government. I think our public also plays a role. Exactly. Because you'll find so many people going to our neighboring countries and looking down on them, and creates the image of, what we call the ugly Indian, like there used to be the ugly American, So I think it's a problem that we should be conscious of. That treat our neighbors with respect, try and integrate their economies with ours because they would also benefit from it. And along with the economic incentives, you have to tell them that please do not do anything that upsets our security calculus. Now, this under Sheikh Hasina in Bangladesh worked very well.
Yeah.
So for 15 years, you had a great relationship with Bangladesh. Now things have changed. Let's see, it's still early days. And there are forces behind the change in Bangladesh guided by outside powers. It's not a government which has any legitimacy. It's just a regime which has taken over power there. So we have to play the long game where we feel that they are not acting in accordance with our national interests. Then perhaps we have to use some of the leverages that we have against them. Now, one of the models which is being talked about is the Maldives model, where, if you recall, a year and a half ago, when Moizu came to power, what is he going to do? He's going to completely ruin the relationship. But we showed patience. We had discussions with them, and Maldives appears to have realized that it's not in Maldives' interest to break off relations with India, and so I think the relationship is back on
Was
an
that a
even
good
keel.
move from our side? Was it a good move? Because clearly Moizu was with China, and so he had sort of boycotted India, and then he makes a full circle back. He comes to India.
Well, it's one thing is to have political rhetoric when you're fighting elections. The other is that when you've got to run a country, that what is the reality? I mean, can Maldives do without India? They say, oh, we will buy medicines from Thailand and send our people to Turkey and so on and so forth. But costs go up. Tourism is a big industry for them. So Indian tourists are significant numbers. If they go down, it hurts them. The Indians are managing a lot of the economy there. The Maldives come to Kerala for treatment, for education, and so forth.
Right.
Now, if all that were to stop, how does it help the Maldives? And so this is a big challenge in our neighborhood policy, that how do we deal with our neighbors? My own view is that we have to be willing to put in money to our neighbors, not necessarily in the pockets of politicians as the Chinese do, but on projects, on other issues, infrastructure, which makes a difference to the lives of people. All our neighbors are like Indian states, some small, some big. How much money do we put into states from the center? We don't do a cost-benefit analysis, We say, okay, this is it. If Bihar needs money, we'll do it. If Maharashtra needs, we'll do it. That is thing. So similarly, that has to be our approach. I think we are at that stage now. Our assistance to our neighboring countries is very large. Now, where a country is aligned with our strategic perspective, we are very generous with them. For example, Bhutan, very small country, but I think 40% or so of our foreign aid goes to Bhutan. With Bangladesh, under Sheikh Hasina, we gave them so many lines of credit and so on and so forth. One hopes that, those countries also realize that a good relationship with India is to their benefit. I mean, they also have to think for themselves and decide whether their own country's progress and prosperity can be enhanced and developed by a good relationship with India, or are they better off by cutting themselves off from India? Now take Pakistan as an example. What is the state of Pakistan today? It's not a happy state. It's a political decision they have taken. Whereas if they were to trade with India, if they were to have a normal relationship with India, if they were not trying to undermine India's territorial integrity, not trying to foment terrorism in India, we could have a great relationship. But this is now the problem, which is a historical problem, that all our neighbors are essentially artificial entities created post-partition. Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nepal was always integrated into India, and the fact that there's an open border regime then and now speaks for itself. I mean, if you were to close the border with Nepal, Nepal would blow up. Maldives, you've just discussed. Sri Lanka, again, it has its own independent identity, but it is projecting itself as an Indian Ocean player, and it is a major Indian Ocean player. But it cannot divorce itself from the linkages with South Asia. It's just not possible. And Sri Lankan history is also replete with, instances of political dynasties across the Pak Straits, Your whole Ramayana story is linked with Sri Lanka. And it extends also to Southeast Asia, to Indonesia, to Thailand, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, everywhere. So these linkages are very important. Now, one of the other problems is that in most of our neighbors, democracy is not as well established as in India. So we have a problem. If you don't do anything, our neighbors will invite you to interfere in their politics. If you start doing something, then you're interfering in their politics, Nepal, Bangladesh. Now, one of the grouses of the present regime in Bangladesh is that we were with Sheikh Hasina and ignored the other parties. Now, Sheikh Hasina was a legitimately elected leader. We deal with whoever is in power. And she was following policies that were in conformity with India's interests. If you start then playing politics in Bangladesh and fiddling around with the Jamaat and the BNP, the government will say, hello, what are you doing? Same with Nepal. You have all the political parties, they want India to interfere. You had a problem with BP Koirala in the 50s and 60s. He was interfering in Indian politics. And that was one of the reasons why Mrs. Gandhi and he fell out. So how to handle the politics in the neighboring countries is a difficult task, because you will get willy-nilly sucked into the domestic politics, even if you don't want it, because they will bring you in, or they will try to bring you in. And because the democracies are not so mature, and many of the countries have had, whether in Nepal, king's rule, or in other countries, military rule, or so forth, you have these aberrations which come on, and this creates a problem for us. And you can't forget the psychological aspect that, we are so much bigger than they are. And in their minds, as I see it, there is a dilemma, At one level, they are part of a larger Indian civilization, which is popularly called Akhand Bharat, okay, in a civilizational sense, which is true. I mean, how do you distinguish between one South Asian country and another? There's overlapping and things. So that is at one level their identity. But then, as modern nation states, they had to develop their own identity. And how to reconcile these two identities becomes a problem. Which is more important? The older traditional one going back centuries or the modern nation state? Now, if you want to develop the identity of a nation state, which you do, which is legitimate as a nation, the first thing you have to do is say, we are not Indian.
Yeah.
So you'll do everything to show that you're not Indian. The next thing you will do is distance yourself from India. When you distance yourself from India, then the next step is anti-Indianism. And the final step is everything is India's fault. So this is a psychological problem with our neighbors. We can't help it because we have worked hard and quite successfully to build a multi-ethnic, multi-religious, multi-society, which is an established democracy. And, we are a little more stable in that sense. These other countries are not, you have coups and military regimes and so forth. You had, even Sri Lanka, look at the war they fought, and then the Tanashahi of Gotabaya and so forth. Rajapaksa, sorry.
But our problem with Pakistan, now I agree that it is a historical problem and everything, but then still Pakistan is hell bent on its ways, which is even when it is in an economical turmoil right now. It rolled out red carpet for Hamas leaders recently in Pakistan occupied Jammu and Kashmir, wherein Al Qaeda leaders were also there, Jaish-e-Mohammed leaders were there, and Hamas's entry so close to India. Isn't that dangerous for us?
Any extremist group which is involved in our neighbors or in India is a problem for us, yes. But Pakistan's mindset is a unique mindset. They fancy themselves as, it's who created Pakistan? It was the elite of UP, Muslim elite of UP, the landlords and so forth who created Pakistan, not the ordinary people of Punjab and so forth, And they fancy themselves as the inheritors, of the Mughals and the Delhi Sultanate and so on and so forth. And look at the way they have named their missiles, Gauri, Ghaznavi, They're invaders. They ravaged the land of what is now Pakistan, but they are now the heroes. How do you explain that? So there is that false sense of superiority and feeling that they are the equal of India. And so that creates a mindset. The second factor affecting Pakistani politics is the army. Now, if, as we all know, the army really runs Pakistan, if there were to be a normal relationship with India, why does Pakistan need such a big army? If it were a normal country, people would say, hey, why are you spending so much money on defense? Spend it on social, economic, people's welfare, infrastructure, all that. But no. I was talking to a Pakistani in London a few years ago, and we were just chatting, and question of army came up, and I said, yeah, our army officers, chiefs, generals who retire, they're generally living in Noida or Gurgaon, some apartment, maybe a house. अच्छा हमारे यहाँ तो सब मेजर साहब को भी बड़ी जमीन मिल जाती है रावलपिंडी में. So they've grabbed all the land, the resources. One of the big things which India did under Nehru was land reform, which has not happened in Pakistan. So you have a feudal elite there, hundreds and thousands of acres of land. Who cares for ordinary people? And that's why there is so much discontent brewing in Pakistan, whether it is in the northwest frontier province area, Baluchistan, Sindh. The Punjabi elite is dominating the whole country, which is, I think, about 70-80% of the total population of Pakistan. And they don't want to give up. And of course, they get the support from the Americans, from the Chinese, who are very happy. Make these two, India and Pakistan, fight. It helps them. So this is the tragedy of Pakistan. And yes, we've had some attempts in the past to have a normal relationship, whether it was, we gave a huge concession when we signed the Indus Waters Treaty in 1960. The Shimla Agreement, a bit of a disaster from our point of view, but anyway, we gave them a lifeline. Under Vajpayee, the bus journey to Lahore, the subsequent betrayal. After that, Agra summit. Under Manmohan Singh, the back channel talks with Musharraf.
So why is this that whenever I speak with anyone from the Indian Army, they tell me that India has won all the wars, but it has lost all the wars on the table. Why does this happen?
Good question. And that is because, I don't know, for some reason our leaders generally seem to think that they'll get a Nobel Prize if they have peace with Pakistan. I don't know. But we have misjudged the character of the Pakistani.
Is it just the leaders, or as a country, collectively, we have misjudged?
I think it is the system. Now, take Musharraf, okay? He started the war in Kargil. But then he was also the person who was looking for a deal with Manmohan Singh through the back channel talks. When he was ousted, the successors of Musharraf, both civil government and the military, they disowned whatever had been discussed in the back channels. So the institution of the army is more powerful than the army chief. The army chief is there. Obviously, he's very, very important. But if the army chief tries to do something which is against the collective interests of the army, then the army does not accept it. Because there were so many vested interests. They're running businesses in Pakistan, all kinds of industries, businesses, and so forth. They're making money. And so long as they are getting the weapons and the money from other countries, they're quite happy to play along.
So do you think that they have a clarity over our relations, which is that we have lived together for many years, but there was a problem and they are very clear about that. Whereas on our side, we never address this problem.
What problem?
That we are two different people.
Oh, no, that's another question, whether we are two different people. I think...
But at least that is what Pakistanis think.
Yeah. That was the whole basis of the theory of Pakistan. And yet, you will find that among the Pakistanis, they are very reluctant to give up their caste identities. You know? And someone will say, I'm a Rajput. You have, one or two names that come to mind. Najam Sethi. Why does he call himself Sethi? Because in their hearts, he can't forget his origins. So there is the Islamic factor, which is now overwhelming. And the whole ideology of Pakistan is around that. But I come to what I said a few minutes earlier, that can they wipe away the thousands of years of shared history? Yeah. How is the history of Pakistani Punjab different from that of Indian Punjab? It's no different. They can't wipe it away. Their customs are all marriage customs and other social customs, all the same. Now there's a lot more of the Islamization and this Urduization and so forth of the country. But it doesn't work, I think. How do they bring together all the people of Pakistan, Baluchis, Afghans, Pashtuns, Sindhis, etc., unless there is some kind of a sharing of power? That is not happening there. And therefore, Pakistan remains essentially an unstable society. But I think, to come back to where we started the discussion, many of our leaders have given in to romanticism about Pakistan, whether Nehru or Indira Gandhi or Gujral or Manmohan
Even for
Singh,
that matter, Atal Bihari Vajpayee.
Vajpayee. Even Modi to start off with. But then, after, the terrorist attacks did not stop, after, I think Pulwama it was, that he said, enough is enough. I don't want to talk to them. It's a waste of time. So, you say, okay, unless you stop terrorism. So this is a change in approach now, which this government, Modi government, has adopted. Let's see. We are moving ahead. We are tackling things with Pakistan. But there's no dialogue, or meaningful dialogue. They are the ones, now they're in a jam because they're the ones who recalled the high commissioners, stopped all the air links, postal links, road, railway, all that they've stopped. Trade, they've stopped. Pakistan is, I think, the greater loser in this.
Right. And the other problem, on one hand, we have Pakistan, on the other side, we have China. And China has been like that bone in our throat, which always comes up with some sort of problems for us. Now, Africa and West Asia, two regions which are very important for India. China is really getting over there, and it is increasing its footprints over there. How do you think this will be a problem for India, and how can India tackle this problem?
Look, Africa, India has had a long historical relationship with Africa, and we started engaging Africa from a developmental perspective in the mid-60s. We also were with them in their support for independence, the anti-colonial, anti-apartheid struggle. We've had a lot of their people who've come to India. We've shared our technology with them wherever we think it is appropriate. So I think that there is considerable goodwill there. lot more needs to be done, and I'm glad that we are finally doing something because, we started this whole business of the India-Africa Summit. You see the Prime Minister and other leaders now making more trips to Africa. We have more missions which have opened up in Africa. Our companies are engaged in Africa in a much greater way than earlier. We are trying to speak for the rights of the Africans in global fora and this whole business of the Global South and the Voice of the Global South summits that we have had is all part of that thing. We have not been very good at executing projects the way the Chinese do it. Their system is different. They use a lot of prison labor. And, in general, our management is not so efficient as a whole, I would say. But we're trying to improve things there. We've set up a new development partnership administration in the MEA. Perhaps we should have a separate ministry or wing to deal with foreign assistance programs. So we're doing all that, but ultimately it's a question of money. How much money can we afford to put there?
And China has deeper pockets than us.
Yeah, they do have deeper pockets. There's no question about it. And they're very adept at giving money under the table and so forth.
And what about West Asia? Are we losing
West Asia is, well, I think we're very active there now.
Yeah.
And again, I remember I was secretary dealing with this when we had the visit of King Abdullah of Saudi Arabia in 2006 as chief guest of Republic Day. There was a big breakthrough in our relations with these because before that, we were dealing with these countries essentially as, suppliers of oil.
Yeah. Transactional relations.
Workers going there and Muslims going for Hajj and Umrah. Mm-hmm. But we never looked at it from a strategic perspective. All that has changed in the last 20 years. So today, we have such a wide-ranging relationship with major countries like Saudi Arabia, UAE. Do you know that when Prime Minister Modi went to UAE for the first time, it was after 34 years that an Indian Prime Minister had gone to UAE.
34 years.
Yeah. So now you see that, our ministers, our other ministers are making frequent trips there. We are involved with this IMAC corridor project. We've got an FTA with the UAE. We want to get the Gulf money to invest in India. So it's a very, very important relationship now. Particularly, as I mentioned earlier, we've got 9 million Indians there. So, the whole Gulf depends to a large extent on the Indians and other expatriates working there, including from Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Philippines, and so forth. So if there is a problem in the Gulf, India can be the first responder. I think many of the countries are keen to have a greater security relationship with India. I think we are moving cautiously in that direction. And we also have to factor in the Israel and the Iran relationships. They're all interlinked. And we do have good relations with all of them. But obviously it is not in our interest if there is any blow up in that region because it would affect our interests hugely, whether it is in terms of oil supplies or the welfare of our people who are living and working there. But you see how Dubai, for example, has emerged as a great destination for our well-off Indians also, not just the workers. It's become an alternative to places like Singapore, so all that is very, very important.
Right.
And now Saudi Arabia has got this 2030 vision plan, which we would like to work closely with them.
But so, because the US influence is declining in West Asia and India is having such amazing relations after such long time with the countries in West Asia. For example, we have signed a FTA with UAE. We are signing an FTA with Oman, and I think we have already on that path. We have good relations with Saudi. We have good relations with Iran, Egypt, and we have particularly balanced our relationships with Palestine and Israel as well. Do you think India should enter West Asia as a regional stabilizer?
Well, how do you stabilize a region where America is by far the most important player, and certainly it is becoming increasingly evident is giving its full support to Israel. They have come.
Can't we do what, let's say, China did with the Iran-Saudi peace deal?
It's a very delicate business there. Our relations with Iran have suffered because of the US pressure. We've stopped buying oil from Iran. We got exemption for Chabahar port. Now, let's see what happens now, but I saw a statement a few days ago that we intend to continue with the Chabahar. That's good, because Iran is not just the Gulf, it's also our access to Afghanistan and Central Asia and international north-south transport corridor with Russia. So there's a strategic importance to our relations with Iran, apart from the fact that it's got a lot of oil and gas and is a country which, the only country in that region which does not depend on outside powers for its security. But it's got a tense relationship with the Arab countries, including Saudi Arabia, all despite this normalization. And I think overall, we seem to have come to the conclusion that the Arab countries matter more to India than Iran. Of course, the Iranian way of thinking and doing business and dealing with India does not help matters, because they're also a little too clever by half at times. But I think we do realize that Iran is an important player, and that Iran also, I think, realizes that India is a useful friend to have. So let's see, these are evolving relationships. Now with Mr. Trump in power, I don't know how things might change, and that is what Prime Minister is going to judge. Early days, so let's see how things evolve.
So the one thing about West Asia, which I've always heard from experts, is that the parts over there move so fast that you just can't predict what's going to happen tomorrow. So it is definitely a wait and watch game.
Well, yeah, you're absolutely right. Now look at Mr. Trump's plans for Gaza. It's so audacious and dangerous. Now, it could blow up the whole region. As it is, you see what's happened in Syria in the course of a week or two. Syria collapsed. Now, it's not a happy situation. See, all the countries have come. Iraq is in trouble. Syria is collapsed. Lebanon is a problem. Well, Palestine, we know, is there. Jordan has got already so many Palestinians and they don't want to have more refugees. So what do you do? It's a very, very troublesome region.
So we have discussed a lot of things in this particular conversation, but there's still which needs to be unfolded. But in the book, you mentioned that India needs a stronger foreign policy doctrine. What do you think will be the Indian grand strategy? What would it look like?
Have I said doctrine? I am not sure I've mentioned doctrine. I'm not sure. Anyway, I don't think doctrines matter. These are not set in stones. In my view, you have to have a goal, an objective, and then work out a strategy for achieving that. There will be obstacles, there will be setbacks, and therefore you have to be ready with alternate strategies. As Mr. Jaishankar pointed out in relation to President Trump coming back to power and his policies, he says, this is not in the syllabus. So, you will come up with unexpected situations. And you have to use your experience, your wisdom to maneuver, things properly, to serve your national interests. So to have a doctrine, I really don't think so. If I've said it, it's wrong. I don't recall saying it, but anyway.
India is a country which has always relied on its soft power, and it has taken pride of its soft power, which is the culture, the democracy, in fact. But in the real world, hard power matters more than soft power, and hard power is military and economy. How do you think India can play and balance out both of these things?
Yeah, of course, hard power is very important, but one should not underestimate soft power.
But is India relying too much on its soft power?
Soft power is there. It's not a question of relying on it. The fact that, you have your culture and religion and dance and music and whatever else, your cinema, is there. Just as the American soft power is there. The Americans don't have to do anything. They can keep bombing the world, but soft power remains. Now, what Mr. Trump is doing is weakening some of that soft power. Because one of the elements of that soft power for America was that it was a welcoming country for immigrants. Now, if that is changing, that soft power goes. India's soft power, all these things there, but it is also, notwithstanding what many politicians in India might say, it is a very inclusive and tolerant society. You have the Mahakumbh going on right now. Have you heard of any religious quarrels there? No. How many crores of people have gone there? Have you ever heard that any religious leader is shouting slogans against another religion? No. That is soft power. And I think those who do not recognize the inclusive and tolerant nature of India, of Hindus, are doing a disservice to India. We have so many sects or things. In Maharashtra, it is Ganesh Puja. In Bengal, it is Durga Puja. In elsewhere, it is, Krishna. Somewhere it is Shiv, Vishnu, etc. Is anyone arguing about that? You do your thing, we do our thing. You want to go to a temple, go. You don't want to go, don't go. Believe in this God, it's all right. Do you have the kind of Catholic Protestant strife that Christianity has wished? Do you have the kind of Shia Sunni thing there? Are the the Ahmadiyas persecuted in India? No, but they are in these Muslim countries. Some of these Muslim countries.
But sir, isn't that equivalent to the caste problems that we have had over the years?
The caste problem is a problem. I'm not saying that there isn't a problem. There is a problem. But we are trying to overcome that. But yet, why do you have people wanting to emphasize caste with the caste census and so forth? This whole business of reservations. Now, you have to draw a line. I'm not in the least defending the caste discrimination, which has been practiced. But that is a social evil which needs to be eradicated. And I think that the governments are trying to do something for that. But don't accentuate the caste divides.
By caste census.
Caste census and otherwise, seeking votes in the name of caste and so on and so forth. This is, I agree, a big problem for India. I'm not saying we don't have a problem, but on religion, we don't have a problem. And yet, the controversies in India are over religion, not about caste. Now, when you have people of at the highest levels of our constitutional structure, from castes which were otherwise ignored or looked down upon, that is one way in which you want to raise the prestige and gain the confidence of people. But that's a larger question for India.
Right. Okay. So one thing which I really wanted to ask you is that because India is growing so aggressively economically, do you think we should push for that UNSC seat? Because if you look at UK and France, they don't matter anymore.
We are pushing for it.
Should it be more aggressive?
Nobody is going to give it to you. The problem, of course, with the UN Security Council is that it has become ineffective in its primary function of maintaining peace and security. The P5 are fighting among themselves. So it's not going to be easy. I don't know if the UN itself can survive in its present form for very long.
Do you think G20 will be that G20 or the G21 now will be the opposing factor to the UN?
Well, you see how the Americans are not participating in the G20 summit later this year because of South Africa's attitude. Those who have the positions of power and privilege don't want to give them up or share them.
Right.
Not easy. Therefore, we made mistakes when we were offered something and didn't take it.
Yeah. And that still haunts us. So I'll ask you one last question for this podcast, which is, in the next 5 years, what do you think is that one bold move from the foreign policy perspective that India needs to make?
I think the biggest thing we need to do is to develop ourselves internally, economically, militarily, technologically, be a more united country socially. I think everything else will fall into place. Because if you're a little more self-reliant, if you're leading in some areas of technology, that will affect your foreign policy, affect your whole country, including your foreign policy.
So essentially, India needs to focus more on, let's say, the technological aspects.
Technological, economic.
Yeah. So we definitely need to enter the AI race then.
I think so. I don't know enough about it, but if this is the technology of the future, then we shouldn't be out of it.
Yeah. Okay. And I hope that the brain drain doesn't affect that.
Well, this is an opportunity for us to develop our own centers of excellence in India. And what the Chinese have done, what is it called, deep seek?
Deep seek, yeah.
Why can't we do it in India?
Hmm.
It's a game changer.
Yeah.
I mean, we haven't done enough in technology. The only area where we are ahead is, say, in this UPI,
UPI, yeah.
which, as you've seen, is so transformative now. It is how many people it has empowered, how many people it has brought into the formal economy,
Right.
and led to more taxes and money and so on and so forth, and convenience. You don't need cash; you just need your phone. So we need to do things. Other thing which we are doing well, we need to do more is on non-conventional energies, solar, wind, tidal energy. All that is important.
Yeah. Okay. So thank you so much for this conversation. I think we covered a lot of topics, but there's so much that I really want to speak with you. And I hope we do many more podcasts in future
Thank
so
you.
that I can pick your brains on a lot of other things as well. So thank you so much, sir.
Thank you for inviting me, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.